very open. I think you guys have probably rubbed up against some other companies in the past where they try to be very proprietary and control their product and that sort of thing. And we really went down the path of trying to be the exact opposite. We try to be very open, use a lot of the open protocols like BACnet and so forth, and really make your controls projects for HVAC be simple and less expensive. And in doing so, we think that we found a way to tackle those potential opportunities that maybe in the past we just were too price competitive out there in the market. I know in my previous life at Johnson Controls, I quoted a lot of jobs. I just couldn't get there at the price point to make the owner move forward with a project. And when I came across Can2Go and saw what they were doing, I was really pretty excited and couldn't wait to get aboard with them because they're taking a lot of neat stuff and making it work. Let me kind of show you what I'm talking about. We're a manufacturer, so we make our own controls, and these are what they look like. I'm going to pass some of these guys around so you guys can touch and feel. If you just kind of take a gander at it, touch and feel it, pass it around, let guys look at it. We make 3 different flavors of our controller. I'll get this one somewhere right there. And inside of each controller, it's pretty much the same thing. You've got a section right here in the center, which is really where all the meat and the potatoes are for our controller. You've got a real-time clock in each one of our controllers, 400 megahertz processor, 2 gigs of flash drive, and 64 megs of RAM. So it's like a micro PC. It's pretty neat. If you were to go to Best Buy, that might be the specs of a laptop just a little while ago. Inside of each controller, you have the ability to come in and do Modbus, do different radio protocols. It's got an embedded BACnet server, so you can do BACnet IP. And it also has a full front end, a web BMS inside of our controller at a price point that's a fraction of like the cost of a Jace. So it's really pretty exciting. With the GW2 that you see passed around, this guy looks like a router. So if you had a deployment where you had to put it on the wall where employees and that sort of thing could see it, I think employees these days are not that offset by something that looks like a router. They're pretty used to it. So it can't even go into space and doesn't look like a piece of air conditioning equipment. This guy, they're each kind of like an aggregator, and you can see the different radios that they have, and I'll talk about the radio protocols in a minute. So this is the GW2, and he's the least expensive of the 3. Then you move up to the UN2, which is exactly the same thing, except now you have all your inputs and outputs. So that could be used for pumps, for air handlers, things of that nature where you want to grab some points and so forth. And then the third one in the list is the VA2. It has all your inputs and outputs, which are universal, but it also has a Belimo actuator on the side of it with an MP bus, so it doesn't take up any of your points. And that's kind of the 3 flavors of our controllers. The thing that's pretty amazing to me about our controllers is that you can certainly hardwire any project just like you have any time in the past. So you can hardwire to any of your end devices. You can hardwire from controller to controller, and then to whatever system that you're going to take a look at this at. Then we also have the capability for Modbus, so you can do your metering. And then we have a couple of radio protocols for end devices as well. Can you flip the light on for me for a second? Thanks. How many of you guys, by a show of hands, have heard of Zigbee before? Okay, pretty good many. How about InOcean? A couple as well. Okay, great. I'm going to talk about both of these real quickly. The InOcean is a radio protocol. This company came out with a radio technology that uses just a teeny bit of electricity. And what it does is an InOcean device will shoot out a quick little telegram to communicate to something else. What they did is they took that technology and licensed it. So there's about 200 companies out there that make InOcean devices. And there's about, if you can imagine, about 750 different InOcean products that are out there. And everything you and I could probably think of, all of them work with the Can2Go solution. But what's neat about the InOcean is because it's such a small amount of electricity that they're actually, in a sense, self-harvesting devices. So something like this light switch that you see I'm walking around with, there's no batteries, there's no hard wire to it. You can literally put this anywhere. You learn this device into a relay, which I brought one that goes with it that I already learned in. This one here is a simple one that you can just plug into a 110, but they also make one that's a hardwired version. So if you can imagine a hardwired one or that one right there, you learn it in, you click your, I had it upside down, I think, whoops. Did you not turn it on, Bill? Or is it not? Whoops. Did I not push it in enough? Well, that's embarrassing.
Yeah.
All right, well, Bill, I'll let you play with that for a second, see if you can figure that out.
The Delta control cadre in there earlier.
I don't know. It was working 5 seconds ago. I don't know what happened. Or maybe I turned that switch off. So these devices can send a telegram to each other and communicate. And then our Can2Go controller can pick up that telegram and see that that switch is turning on and off or not. And it can also override that and give it a command to work as well. The InOcean companies make a number of other devices too. Things like lux sensors, door contacts, window contacts, sensors like this. This one right here, made by Reglavar, has got a little solar panel that will, with just a normal 2 or 3 hours in the lighting of a room, it will fully charge itself. And then we did a beta test site with Google, and they wanted to see how long that particular guy could survive. It lasted 21 days, 7 hours before it gave out a death certificate. So it's pretty amazing technology that these things can create enough electricity. That particular switch there, the piezo crystal inside, just the mechanical motion of rocking that rocker in that switch generates enough electricity to make that thing work. So you got a lot of neat end devices that are in the InOcean realm. You can go out on the internet, Google them, and look at InOcean, see what all those sorts of things are that are out there, and they all work with the Can2Go product. Then what you have is also the Zigbee protocol, which a lot of you guys, I saw your hands. Zigbee is a little bit more powerful signal. So the InOcean, where it's at 315 megahertz today in North America, Zigbee is at 2.4 gigahertz. It does require power, Zigbee, so you would either need a battery or hardwire the Zigbee. And then there's a lot of really neat end devices on the Zigbee side. We make a couple of them ourselves at Can2Go, which would be like this Belimo actuator that has a Zigbee radio inside of it. So if you had, say, an outside air damper or a valve somewhere and you really didn't want to run conduit and hardwire to reach it, you can actually use the radio protocol to communicate to this device. You would have to have power to it, but then you can stroke a damper or a valve or something like that with that Zigbee end device. But one of the most common, I think, in my head, as far as those Zigbee devices that are end devices, would be our Schneider branded Viconic stat that has the Zigbee Pro chip inside of it. So this little guy right here, you literally could take an existing stat that's on the wall, take it off, a couple 3 wires to this guy, a little bit of configuration, and this guy is up and talking to that rooftop package unit. And let's say you had Bob's Bait and Tackle, and he's got 4 rooftop package units. You now have a solution where you could come in with these guys, the cost of a stat in a sense, that's Zigbee, pull the 4 off the wall, put these 4 on, configure them in about 5 or 10 minutes or whatever, how quickly your tech guy is comfortable with doing these for the 1st or 2nd or 5th time. Then take a Can2Go GW2, 24 volt power to this guy, do an IP drop to him, so now he's on the LAN and you can access that information. So you've got a controller that's under 500 bucks, stats that are under 200 bucks, so you've got 1,300 bucks in hardware. You've just got Bob's Bait and Tackle full automation system in just about 3 or 4 hours of your time with bench time and out on the site. It's a pretty amazing cost proposition that you can now hit Bob's bait and tackle that probably had looked at controls prices at 8 or 10 or 12 grand, and now you're suggesting to them at 40, 50% margin or maybe better, and you're at 3 grand. It's a pretty amazing cost proposition to do a project. So I'll pass this guy around in case you guys haven't seen that. So the controller, as I mentioned here, and I showed you the port on the side of the controller, you can do a drop to it and get it onto the LAN, so it's IP Ethernet. And the neat thing about that is you have a lot of flexibility with the Can2Go solution. So every single one of our controllers that you saw, they all had that drop on the side. They're all basically the same. That VA2's got the drop on it as well, the port for that as well. So you can do your deployments a lot of different ways. You can, if you had a data center or a school where they had tons of drops, you could do an IP drop to every controller if you wanted to. But I mentioned before, you can also do hardwire, and you can hardwire any of the controllers of ours that you want. So you could certainly do them daisy chain if you want, and then use a protocol called CAN bus. Have any of you guys, that's the one I usually get like blank stares. Anybody ever heard of CAN bus before? No, right? A couple guys have? Yeah, the Bosch made that for the automotive industry in '96. So when you're driving your car out of Stromquist parking lot, the very first red light you hit, you step on the brake, that's going to be CAN bus in your car stopping you. It doesn't have that master-slave relationship, and so it's shooting these little packets of information. And the devices that are communicating via CAN bus, they basically, does that pertain to me? Not really. Okay, good. So I'll just move on and do my thing. So CAN bus is a very stable, reliable protocol that you could use inside the Can2Go solution if you wanted to. Then, of course, we also have the Zigbee. So you could have your controllers in your deployment talk to each other via this radio protocol. So imagine walking out on a controls job, and all you can do is wire your GW2 with your IP drop and power, and then put your controllers wherever else in your building, and you don't have to run any conduit or any wire if you don't want to. If it makes sense financially that you don't have to do that, you can certainly do that. The neat thing about the Zigbee is, most of you guys know, with the Zigbee, you're able to create a mesh network within your ecosystem. So the neat thing about that mesh network is, I've done a couple of deployments. Like one of them I did was a big CVS distribution center. So imagine a 70,000 square foot warehouse, 3-story, metal everywhere, but a lot of open space, forklifts running all over the place, things like that. A lot like Eric's place right out here, but maybe a little bit bigger. So the neat thing was that I went in, we deployed it, laid out the network, and it worked perfectly. But Ishmael didn't tell me that, oh, well, this section right over here, we're getting ready to build this gigantic 3-story metal rack with conveyor belts, and this is going to be where we're going to do our pharmacy, dropping a lot of pills into, from a big box down to a little box. So my deployment worked perfectly, except when I circled back around 7 months later and they had built that, I was worried about that connection of that controller and that controller, because now there was this huge rack right in the way. Well, the nice thing was, without even needing any supervisory input from Ishmael or myself, the Zigbee network had taken that controller, talked to this controller over here, who would then talk to that controller over there. And it kept working perfectly. It's self-forming and self-healing, that Zigbee network mesh. So it's really a pretty neat tool to have in your toolbox as far as what you can do to lay out a particular system. So now that we have an IP drop to at least one of our controllers, we can now grab all of those points and all that information and port it out in a couple of different ways. The first thing is, the Can2Go controller actually has a front end inside of every single one of those controllers. So any one of them could be how you access the system, create your trend logs, your graphics, and see what your points are and so forth. So I'll show that to you in just a little bit in a couple other slides. But some of the other things that are really neat about it is it can communicate via OBIX, Open Building Information Exchange. It can do BACnet. It works really well with JACES and Tritium and Niagara and that sort of thing. But it also works really, really well with a lot of the really smart guys that are out there with other products that are pretty amazing. Some of you who sat in the previous class before and saw what DG is doing, that would be a perfect combination too. Just like the Viconic stat is the device and the Can2Go in the middle and the DG, that's a great solution because Can2Go is really designed to try to work with everybody. If you're Johnson Controls or your Siemens or some other proprietary system you run up against, it's their front end and it's got great graphics and good analytics and everything. If it'll take the information via OBIX or BACnet IP, we'll give it to them. Our controls work perfectly. So it's really a good kind of in-between solution. One of the things I like to say to a lot of the guys, especially I think this would hit home with you as well, is that you potentially have that guy, Bob, who's got Bob's Bait and Tackle. And so he's a pretty smart guy. He's successful. He's got this tackle shop that he's had for 10 years and is doing well. What's the logical next step for him? Well, today he's not one store, he's 4 stores, right? But he's a pretty hands-on guy, so he wants to see what's going on, and he can physically get to those 4 stores. But you and I both know that where's he going to be in 10 years? He's going to be 15 or 20 stores. So the Can2Go solution is inexpensive enough that you can actually use that example I talked about earlier, put it in his 1 store, grow with him to 4 stores, but when he becomes 15 stores, he now has the budget to become the real customer that you want, that has a full-blown enterprise system that's way beyond what the Can2Go solution is today for him. So the Can2Go product is really good to give you something that can work with those business owners and grow them up. The other thing is, at the price point that it's at, I don't know how many of you guys have truck-based guys. I assume all of you do. And many of you probably incentivize those truck-based guys to get pull-through. Why not give them something on the automation side where they can drive some business for you at a cost point that those guys can actually get Boiler Bob to agree to? You know, a couple of grand to have automation all of a sudden, Boiler Bob's going to say, yeah, let's make that happen. So it's kind of a neat product from that standpoint as well.
Chris, what's the max number of controllers?
That's a great question. Depending on how you deploy it, and I think your question is regarding Zigbee, is that correct, or just in general?
Just in general.
Just in general, it's relatively unlimited, but you're going to find that our graphics are, it's a tab system, and I'll show that to you in a couple of slides. To be honest with you, if you put a gazillion things on it, you're really going to want to go to a better, it's going to be worth spending a few $100s more and add to our system to make it even more exciting. But in a sense, the question is, yes, you could have it unlimited, and then you're going to have a lot of points, and you know, the graphics is maybe my weak point in that scenario. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, and then in the Zigbee, we do have a 2-day training class. So and we're actually going to have it here next week. If you guys can be a part of that, it's going to be amazing. So we go through a lot of the rule of thumbs, and there's some other rule of thumbs that I didn't answer, which was on the Zigbee side. You typically want about 75 Zigbee devices in one zone. So you might have more zones if you have a lot more Zigbee devices than that.
Can we start at 6:30 also?
For the training?
Yeah.
I think we do, actually. No, I'm kidding.
Show of hands, if anybody's just not coming, that is interested in coming, just raise your hand real quick so we'll just sort of gauge it. Okay, cool. Well, we don't have to worry anymore for anything else.
No, I think the class is, I want to say it's like 9 o'clock to 4
Where's Ross?
for 2 days. Yeah. And we're going to have breakfast at 8.
We'll get you guys the details.
So inside of our controller, I liken it to like your Microsoft Outlook email. You've got a panel here where you've got your controller and each of the devices hanging off of it. This guy would be the main controller that's connected, then you have other controllers. If you click on any one particular controller, you'll go to this pane which shows you all the objects inside of it, and then you click on one of those and you'll see those pieces of information that you can manipulate and or look at for a particular controller. Here you can see where an end device like this switch and so forth would be one of those objects inside there. If you switch that, we even have some of the graphics inside the controller that shows those. The script or logic inside the Can2Go controller is Lua programming. This was something that came out of Brazil, and a lot of the gamers use this. It works really well, so if you're playing this weekend on your Xbox or PlayStation, that's Lua programming because it works really well, and it's very open. So when I talk about the openness of our controller, one of the things that I really like to point out is that with the Can2Go, we are a manufacturer of products. So that's kind of where our focus is. So we don't charge any licensing fee. We don't charge anything for firmware upgrades. If you attend that 2-day training that we're going to have here next week at Stromquist, you will get a user ID and password and have access to the backside of our website where we have most of the programs and scripts already written that you can just download into a controller, and then access to any firmware upgrades or anything like that throughout the future. So the neat thing is with our controller, you literally also could have another profit proposition in that your accounts that you have, your boiler bobs out there, you could also sell them a control service agreement with the Can2Go, because you're only going to have your time, 10 minutes and downloading a firmware upgrade, and then you go to his controller and hit it at the IP address in 10 minutes to download that firmware upgrade in there, and you can have a full-blown yearly service agreement for them, and the Can2Go portion of that, you would have no expense except for your own time.
Which scripting tool do they use? The Control Basic or?
Yeah, it's like a Basic or C++, and you don't need any extra software or any tools per se, or everything's inside of every controller. And it even has the ability so that you can run your scripts and debug them and that sort of thing, all inside of every one of the controllers. And then you can also do graphical programming if you're more comfortable with that. So you can do the boxes and drop them and then connect, and it's all dynamic. It'll show your values and so forth inside the controller. This would be an example of a dashboard that you can create. Here, obviously, we used a wallpaper that was Can2Go. You can drop in pictures of their site. You can drop in texts. We have all these sliders and dials and trend logs and pie charts, all those things. You just hit this little button right over here, and the whole panel right here slides over, and this then becomes an editable field. You just click on something, drag it over, drop it. You can scale it up or down. You can easily, I think one of the other questions earlier, you can certainly change it from 0 to 100 to 30 to 50, whatever you want. They're all adjustable. The trend log would tie into a point in somewhere else, like a temperature gauge or something like that inside the controller. We have scheduling inside of our controller today, and you'll see right there is a 7-day scheduler. With our next firmware upgrade that's coming out in the next 30 days, it'll be a 365 scheduler. So we'll sit before the board and become BTL next month with the Can2Go controller. We can do the graphics so you can see their system. We don't have the builder where you can build a 3-dimensional. So this is just a picture that we grabbed off of Google, but you can certainly drop in a 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional if you already have it built into our controller. Here you can see that you have the ability inside of our controller to set regions, have them color-coded. You can associate them with either a light switch or a temperature gauge. You can drop in a bubble so you can see the particular information up here in these tabs. So here's would be the example of your question. You can see here that as I add more and more tabs of things, you're going to see those tabs across that bar right there. So it becomes a bit extensive. But you could certainly have a tab here for a particular piece of equipment. Let's say it's a York or a Train rooftop package unit. If you wanted to drop in a picture of that particular piece of equipment for that job site and then tie in that particular information, so Ted, the facilities guy, could say, I want to look at RTU number 3. He goes to that and sees exactly those particular points for that. You can certainly do that there. I talked briefly about the metering. That's kind of neat because you can drop in metering, CTs, you can see what's going on, you can do your M&V for your particular projects if you'd like to. Here's an example of the in-ocean devices on one side that I talked about, and then that Zigbee network mesh here and how the controllers work together. A lot of the questions I sometimes get are, well, how do I know that this wireless is really going to work? And they have the Dolphin View software there from an ocean that's free, so you can test different in-ocean devices to see if they're communicating together and so forth. Inside of each of the controllers, there's also the capability to see controller to controller on that Zigbee protocol, what your signal strength is. And you can, inside the controller, make it whisper or make it shout, so you can adjust your system and so forth there. So there's a couple different ways that you can do your deployments. You literally could go walk a site with 2 of the controllers and 2 transformers, so you get power to each one, and a laptop, and lay out your whole job prior to ever selling it or deploying it, and you would know, oh, if I'm going to put a controller there and one way over there, I know they're communicating to each other and it works perfectly. Zigbee protocol, I won't kind of go into too deep of that, but one of the things that I always like to make guys realize, because I've been where a lot of you are before. In my previous life, I sold a lot of jobs. I ran into the boiler Bob that said, yeah, no, I don't know about this wireless thing. I've heard some horror story. I'm not going to do that on my job. I'm not comfortable with it. And what I usually will say to them is, well, you know, what's that on your hip? You know, that's my cell phone. How does that work? Oh, it works perfect. Well, do you use it in your car? Do you drive with it? No, I have Bluetooth in my car. Okay. And what is that? Where's that big desktop? Oh no, they got me a laptop finally. Do you take it home with you? Yeah. You plug it in? No, I got a router at home. Router? Okay. I sit there and walk through Ted's day with him and make him realize that he's doing wireless all day long, and in fact, he's doing it at home. He's doing it all the time, and that is the future. You guys that have been here in this business for a while, you've seen pneumatics, and now we're DDC. Well, the next evolution is wireless. That's the way the technology is going. And I would hope you guys would explore it, because it's really pretty amazing. It will give you the opportunity to do jobs that you maybe never had a chance to do before. The Zigbee protocol works really well, and one of the things that we show folks is that, yeah, there's plenty of Wi-Fi and wireless things that are going on in a particular building. With the Zigbee, you have the ability with a Can2Go controller to reside out here on channel 25 and 26 if you want to, where there's virtually nothing going on in North America, so that deployment will work really well. And those are some of the things that we cover in that 2-day training this next week. This was that comm log that we talked about, where you can run your script and see how it's working and debug. There's an example of a site survey tool, a Zigbee site survey tool. Here are some of these devices that I passed around that are Zigbee, like the Viconic Stat, or the TE2 is an I/O expander, and then of course the Schneider branded Viconic Stat that has Zigbee capabilities. One of the things that I like to talk about towards the end of the presentation is that besides the fact that you have no licensing fees, the upgrades, all of that is free and included, but I like to talk about the jobs themselves, because if you go wireless, what we're finding is that guys are getting in and out of the project about 40% faster. It takes less time, and commonsensically you would recognize that, because you're not running wire, you're not running conduit, and so forth. So what happens when you're able to get in and out of a job site quicker? Well, I can tell you a bunch of things. The first thing is that going wireless is way less invasive. So I don't know how many times you've sat there and got Ted, the facility guy, to buy in. Then you go to the C-level and talk to Samantha, and she says, yeah, the ROI looks good. You guys finally figure out how to get the price point down. I can go ahead and push this through because your ROI makes sense. Let's go with the project. Then Ted takes you over to Bethany, and you're walking in her area of the building. Have you ever done this before? Yeah, what we're going to do is bring in a bunch of ladders and guys with tool belts, and we're going to throw sheets all over all your desks, and yeah, I'll probably be here for a day and over there another day. What's her reaction? Hell no, ain't happening on my watch, right? It's a what? It's an after-hours project. It's overtime. So you'll find that you sit there with Bethany and go, well, I know we're coming to do this, but all I got to do is just really get right here and take this one tile out, one ladder. Would you be cool with that? Well, yeah, I think I could work with you, Chris, on that. I'll do that. It changes the playing field. All of a sudden, you're a regular time job, and all your competition is an OT job. What does that do to your cost sheet? It makes you have no competition. It makes you unbeatable. So it changes the playing field. But then when you get in there and you do the job and you get in and out quicker, what does that do for you? I don't know how many of you guys are financial guys for your company, but I imagine we all got somebody in the company who's higher up than us and is a boss who's the bean counter writing the check. And I can tell you what they're concerned with. They're concerned with their limited resources because they only have so many trucks. They only have so many guys. And so yesterday, you were doing 3 projects a month. I can guarantee you, if you can get in and out of those jobs quicker, those 3 jobs becomes 4 jobs. You can manage your resources of your business better. And then for me, selfishly, as a sales guy, I'm like, okay, so if we're getting the job done faster, guess what? I'm invoicing faster. I'm getting my commission faster. So I was pretty fired up about it. So you can look at those kind of things and see if that makes sense for you. There's a lot of buildings that are out there. The number of buildings is amazing percentage-wise. It's not the majority of the square footage in a sense that these larger buildings have a big chunk and they have automation for HVAC, they have automation for lighting, but there's a ton of this small to medium-sized buildings and businesses out there. And the other cool thing is, look at this number here. With the Can2Go solution, I always like to think of when I go out and talk to Bob and Bob's Bait and Tackle Shop, I get him to do the HVAC automation, and I just want to circle back around as a sales guy and sit down with him again after a couple months and look at his year-over-year electrical costs and see if, instead of running everything 24/7, are we saving energy? Yes, we are, Chris. Cool. All right, well, you know what? We have my second project already teed up. I already got all the infrastructure already there. All I need is those end devices of those switches and circuits and relays that Eric can sell you right over the counter here, and now you have no competition, right? Because all you're doing is selling the end devices to do lighting automation. Because you've got the expensive parts already done and paid for. Because you can do that in Ocean Protocol and do that automation as well with the Can2Go solution. So what it used to look like is hardwiring everything. Hardwiring the HVAC automation, hardwiring the lighting. But now that you go with the Can2Go architecture, a lot of this stuff starts going away. You can do a number of devices. You can have flexibility as far as whether you hardwire some, wireless some, Zigbee some, and Ocean some. The gateways can go away. You just tee it right up and you're ready to go. When I talk about the wireless, I'm a big proponent of that, as you can tell. But it doesn't mean that there's no wires. So if you're doing a VAV right here and you got a discharge air temperature sensor literally right there, you're not going to go wireless. It's just a couple feet away. So you're going to hardwire that. But it's certainly going to take some of the cost out of it for you. When you're networking the Can2Go controllers, you can do them daisy chain if you want. You can do drops to all of them like we talked about. And or you can do a Zigbee mesh and have them all work with each other that way. And then of course you want to do one where you get the IP drop to it. And then we talked about the fact that you can do a bunch of different second projects.
You can also do a mixture, right? So you can
Yes, you can. You can do a mixture. So you can do some of the area hardwire if it makes sense. Wires are already existing. Be sensible about your project and save money. But where you want the wireless, maybe you want to go that way. So here's that typical rooftop package unit, smaller deployment that we talked about. You change out your stats, they're talking Zigbee to the controller. You can do your metering so you can see what's going on there. Then you've got your different in-ocean for your lighting relays. And you've got a fully automated building at a really kind of a fraction of what you used to think that would cost to do for your customer. I like to talk about different case studies real quick. This particular one was a basilica up in Canada, and as you can see by looking at the photograph, that thing is very ornate. A lot of stone edifices. They had Mitsubishi heat pumps down in the basement, ALC front end. Could never get the temperature space right. And you can imagine the influx and outflow of people was pretty dramatic on any given day. And there was just no way that they were going to let anyone do conduit, drill, run wires, that sort of thing. And I mean, every one of you guys have probably got some heritage building you've looked at some point along the way and just really thought, yeah, I don't want to tear this place up. I just can't do it, and they're not going to go for it. We came in, we did the in-ocean, I passed one around, that in-ocean sensor in places, and as an air conditioning guy, I would be hard pressed to find where we put those inside there, so you really don't see them, but they're there, they're reading, they're communicating out a telegram, put in Can2Go controllers as a mesh network. All we had to do is get power to them, so it was really good. Communicated all back to the ALC front end. Finally got their creature comfort accomplished, and it worked well. Plus it knocked 15% off of their electricity, so it worked really good. This is a school. This particular example, where I'm from, Orlando, Florida. Florida's ridiculous, man. The schools, cost effective, what do they do? Portables out the back, right? They don't want to do the hard brick and mortar buildings if they can get away with it, so tons of portables. Exact same scenario with here. This is the front of this particular school, but behind it there's a bunch of portables. I've run into a lot of situations where the gym is another building way over there, and nobody really wants to do the cost of trenching to hit that thing hardwire. So with the Can2Go controllers on the Zigbee side of that radio, you can have a Can2Go controller at the main school and another Can2Go controller at that gym and do Zigbee outdoors, line of sight, 1,500 feet. Now, don't do your deployment in the wintertime with a bunch of trees in the way that have no leaves on them, and then the leaves come back because the leaves will mess up your attenuation. Inside of that warehouse, like that one I described, where it's 3-story and big and open and a lot of metal, you can probably hit 500 feet line of sight with Zigbee. Penetrating paneling, gyp walls, block, brick with the Zigbee. I'm telling everybody you want to stick with probably about 100 to 150 feet when you're laying out your plans and drawing where you're going to lay out your controllers and your circles and that sort of thing. So it works pretty well. And this one here, this particular school, the portables were fine. The real problem with this project was that building right there because it was loaded with asbestos. I don't know if you guys have ever run into asbestos, but I have. I can tell you it's a dirty word. Nobody wants to talk about it. The remediation on that is 4 or 5 times the cost of any HVAC project that you will look at. It's ridiculous. Plus it takes time because you got to wait for them to come in and do it all, completely remediate, remove everything, hazmat suits, the works. So if you run into an asbestos situation, wireless may be the only way where it's cost effective because maybe you don't disturb the situation there. The Can2Go solution works really well in hotels, in schools. This particular one, they use that DA2 to hit this Belimo valve because in this particular school it was a little bit up north, so what they had was those radiators inside of the rooms. So they would use the GW2 in the hallway, then they would reach out to that radiator and control it via Zigbee, then they would control the lighting and the temperature via in-ocean, and then there were their lighting circuit relays. So they'd have one in the hall, and this GW2 would hit multiple rooms, because remember you're going so many distance out to each particular one, so it could actually cover a number. You can do the same thing like in a hotel and that sort of thing. Here's another factory where they did that, and this particular one, it was a box company, and those rolls of paper that you see behind me, were just so dense that you couldn't put a signal through. So sometimes they would move pallets of that stuff in the way. And again, the Zigbee would be self-forming, self-healing, so it would bounce around it until the pallet was moved out of the way, and then it would go back to the path, the shortest path of resistance. You can see that's how they laid out that particular 400,000 square foot facility. That was where the location of the controllers are. If you ever want to go to a site with me, let's go to Vegas, because we did that casino. You can imagine here, this particular one, the game changer was not the cost of the automation, it was the disruption. They didn't want to have the floor with all those one-armed bandits. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but when they rope it off and they pull everything out of the way, and they're making no money. Believe me, they know how much it costs per square foot of revenue that they're generating. So the solution here with the Can2Go to do all the VAVs was all about the fact that it was less invasive. We dropped in and we did, I think it was like 132 boxes for the first round. We're now doing the second stage of that, which is 340 VAVs for that particular project there in Las Vegas. Talked a little bit about hotels. Again, in the hallway, and then you can pick up the various devices, run it down the center, and then pick up everything. Reduce your costs, and that's pretty much it. What questions do you guys have for me?
On that last cluster at Vegas,
Yes.
you had a bunch of VAVs. You had
This one here,
I'm sorry, I don't know what's that one.
or this one?
The Las Vegas casino.
Back up.
Okay. Now it froze up.
Your main supervisory controller had, well, how many VAV boxes?
Right there you go.
You have 5 Zigbee clusters of Can2Go VA2. Is that your VAV controller, or is that just a box?
Yeah, so it was 132 of those VA2s, this guy right here. And what we typically do if you had this particular solution, as I would say to you, this guy is doing probably a pretty in-depth program to run that VAV, especially if it's pressure dependent. So let it do all its heavy lifting right at the VAV. For just a few $100 more, let this guy be the aggregator of all of those guys on that zone. Is that what your question is?
Yeah, so you had one of those with the cluster, 5, is that 5 of those white boxes?
Yes.
Talking to those, how many of those that would?
So it's a 1 to 24 relationship.
I guess that's my question, 24
There you go.
units.
I knew we'd get there, sir. Sorry, man. It took me a minute to get to where.
24 of these to the.
Yeah, so it would be 24 to 1. So then you could do the math. And I don't know that they skinned it that tight either, because I don't know.
The same thing if that was a network stat?
This, you could, yeah. This guy could just, because he's got the drop, he could do everything. I mean, he could do everything by himself. It's just that if you're running a VAV with a lot of points and that sort of thing, then you're hitting this guy to also, hey, tell me what's also going on with the other 24. Oh, and by the way, I want you to do the scheduling too. And oh, by the way, I want you to do the graphics too. My advice, for a couple $100, they're so cheap, why not? Just get one more and let this guy do all the scheduling and the trending, and ping this guy to see the other 24. Let this guy do his heavy
That answers
lifting.
my question, because 24 devices for every supervisor.
Yes, absolutely. Would be the rule of thumb. So when I say rule of thumb, you could probably do 25 if you don't have a lot of points going on with this guy, and get a few more. In the training that we're going to do next week, you'll get those rules of thumb. But invariably, guys are out there all the time pushing us to the envelope. I mean, we had a guy that wanted to do a chilled beam application. He said, how many backnet objects can we comfortably support in here? Could we do 160, 170? Yeah. So what did he do? He downloaded all 750 backnet objects into the controller and crushed it. And he couldn't figure out why it would work. We said, well, send us your database. We looked at it. Dude, we agreed to 160, 170, and you got 750. Is there any way you could survive with without the other 500 and everything? Yeah. Delete it off and it worked perfect. So certainly we're going to tell you a rule of thumb that'll work really well, and you decide yourself if you want to push it. And then when you break it, we'll help you try to fix it. What other questions do you guys have?
If you have 5 of those supervisory controllers, how do you then have a consolidated front end? Like your single point of access, the customer says, hey, I'm going to you know, each one of those is going to have an IP, that white box, right?
Yes.
Okay, so then from a consolidated front-end standpoint, are you then managing multiple different IPs for a single point of access to?
Yeah. So let's say that you've got a building that you've got a few rooftop package units, 2 or 3 air handlers, and some VAVs. So you might have one W2 there, and he's picking up the rooftop package units would be your Viconic Schneider branded stat. The air handlers would be the UN2 because you've got a couple of points that you want to pick up on. And then the VAVs would be the VA2. And then you have to decide how much of that do I want to see in my graphics, and you can build the graphics to whatever level that you want. But understand that my graphics are relatively simplistic. You know, they're not going to be as dynamic and robust, and you can certainly do as much to them as you want and get as creative as you want, but you know, it's going to be...
You're going to drop your IP into one of the controllers and
Right.
connects everything else.
So you can have one
Whatever
be your
protocol you want to use.
one will be your point of access for the system.
That's right.
Okay, nice.
Exactly. And today we would use Firefox because it's open, and then by the end of the year will be IE and Safari and those sorts of things. So you guys are catching Can2Go at a really good time because we're probably 4 or 5 months away from taking all the money that Schneider's given us for R&D and ramping up our roadmap really fast because of it. So by the time you guys get up to speed with Can2Go, it's going to be substantially better even than it is today in the next couple of months, because we're a relatively small company that's flexible and can move pretty quickly. And then ultimately, if you like this solution, if it's Bob's Bait and Tackle and it's a small deployment or something like that, you're probably fine with the Can2Go. But if it's a pretty decent solution, you can go just a couple $100 more and have, you know, one of those other guys' products up there in the cloud that have, you know, like DG or somebody like that, that has an even more expansive, because we're more than happy to port up that information to a cloud solution or somebody else, or your existing proprietary system that you ran across at that customer site that you thought, it's whatever, I'm never going to have a chance to do any controls work for those guys.
All right.
Thank you.
If you need to control it or measure it, Stromquist & Company has a control solution for you. With over $2 million of inventory between our Georgia and Florida locations, an easy-to-use online ordering platform, same-day shipping, and a factory-trained team of controls experts to answer your questions, Stromquist & Company continues in its tradition of offering great service and great products.